Here we are looking at a little session on our door hanger project, and I'm basically going to walk you through what we need to do for the assignment. But what's great about that is that I get to cover a lot of very important things about how to work within Illustrator in order to get ourselves properly set up and ready to rock and roll with a print project. So far, everything we've been working with in this class has been more or less intended for screen representation, with the exception of the logos, which, as you all know, in the format of vector illustration and design, those logos could be implemented, into print or whatever. But we haven't really been talking about print yet. So this little rundown is going to go through quite a few details about how to get ourselves prepared for pre-press handoff, meaning you've gone through all of the proper steps to ensure that from Illustrator we are creating a product that can be sent to a printer. And in this case, we're just going with a local, like, color copy digital printing service. We're not going to put our energy yet into the full-on 4-color process printing. So our ultimate goal here is to make sure that all of our material is at the right resolution, the right color space, and is ready to be sent through a digital printer, which could mean a desktop inkjet printer that you have at home or your office, whatever, or you send it off to a local print service that deals with, those really awesome full color printers, which are basically the copiers. You know what I mean? The Kinko's or the FedEx office or your local, print service or whatever you have on campus. So take a look at what I'm currently have pulled up on screen here. This is an example that I created for this door hanger, and I chose to go with a makeup company that deals with dog sitting and exercise services. I chose Aardman. Why? Because in the old times of the phone book, Aardman would show up first, and to a lot of people that was very important. And I always thought it was kind of funny how many companies could try to squeeze in all the A's to guarantee that they'd be at the top of the list. It really doesn't matter that much anymore. Phone books are almost a thing of the past. We search everything via the internet or our smartphones, and it doesn't really matter what comes in alphabetically anymore. It's more about relevance and ratings and all that stuff, which is awesome. That's how it should be. So that's progress, people. Door hangers. So the project that we're having to wrap our heads around is a door hanger, a front and back setup, and I have a front being in color and the back being in black and white, just to allow us to do two things: to think about both ends of the spectrum as far as a creator, as far as limitations go and whatnot, and also just keeping in mind costs. If you had a client who said, "Hey, I understand you're a designer and you can do this stuff and you're good at layout. We want to do these, we want to print door hangers, but we don't have a ton of money, but we want to make them look good." And you can say, "Here, here's a thought. I think we should do a front color and a back in black and white. That'll cut some of your costs down significantly." and you come out looking like the hero, and they'll want to hire you again. So a few things about what we're looking at here, and about some of the specifics of the assignment. Uh, we do need 2 artboards in one project, and we do need to have some sort of a raster image. In this case, on mine, it's this dog with the ball on the grassy field. And we need to have some of our elements go all the way to full bleed, which I have everything on the front and a few things on the back, these gray boxes going to full bleed. I'll explain it more as we go along, and then some typography work. So how do I set this up, and what's the best way to get started? The best way to get started really is to just start with our artboards. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a new document open up, and I will choose a print profile for several reasons. First is that it deals with, well, I guess it doesn't really matter. It ends up, I was going to say it takes us to inches, but I'm thinking Photoshop world actually. We have our number of artboards, and I'm just going to do one for now because I want us to set up one and then go through the process of creating our second artboard. Only because it's a good process to go through. I know I've dealt with artboards with you earlier in the beginning of the semester, but this is just one more time for us to think about it in greater detail. So by default, this is a letter size. We don't want that. We want to deal with a specific size. And we don't want points, we want inches. We're thinking print, we should be thinking inches because it's about how big is your paper. And when you think about paper, you don't think about paper in points or pixels. You think about it in actual measurements, and inches is the world that we live in. So these door hangers are going to be 3 2/3 of an inch wide, and 2/3 of an inch translates to 0.667, and they are going to be 8.5 inches tall. So you are pretty much set to be able to include 2 of these, if not 3, on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So if you were planning on actually trying to make it work and save money and have it all be a good front and back thing, yeah, you can definitely put 3 of these things on one piece of paper. And that is part of the process of being a designer, is to try to be economical, you know. So if you're trying to do little handbills or business cards or whatever, you got to try to say, well, I know that the size is going to be this, but what would it actually, how would it actually manifest in a print job where I'm dealing with sheets of paper, and how can I stack and get them all together so that we can get more bang for our buck? It would be kind of a bummer to print 2 of these on an 8.5 by 11 when you actually could fit 3, and you're wasting paper, and you're having to increase the amount of production. So there's that part. So this next area, bleed, we have never really talked about bleed. Bleed is about ensuring that artwork, background images, photos, or whatever it is that need to be printed all the way to the edge of your paper are guaranteed to go all the way to the edge. In fact, the bleed means you're going past the edge of where that paper will be cut. So if you increase a bleed, the first increment is 1/8 of an inch, 0.125. That's pretty standard. So I am saying I want my document to be 3 2/3 of an inch wide and 8.5 inches tall. That's where the knife will cut it. That's where the machine that the printers will use to cut these things into segments will actually cut. But to guarantee that there's no little slivers of white paper left around just because, you know, human error or tech error screws up, you don't have anything that's bare. So you're pushing your artwork past the boundaries of what you know will be the cut line. Typically, if we were going to be sending our work to a 4-color press, which they're really, you know, here we are in Montana. I believe there's only one facility left in Missoula that does a 4-color press process, and that is, oh shucks, they're over by the mall. It used to be Gateway. There was Artcraft. You know, now Artcraft is an exercise place, and Gateway's just gone. But the new place over on South still has a 4-color press in operation. They deal with 4-color or spot color or Pantone, whatever, multiple, you know, all the way up to I think 8 is what they have. Color press where the inks are applied to the drums, and it's a process where each color is laid down on the sheet of paper in sequential order to simulate a full color spectrum. What we're doing in this project is we're just saying, no, we're not worried about that yet. I'll get into that in the next one. But here we are dealing with, you know, color laser printers or inkjet printers, and it's a digital process where they're still infusing the inks kind of through a more or less of a spray of dots, and makes it turn out the way that we would expect it to be. So our color mode in this project needs to be set to RGB. Why does it need to be set to RGB? It is because all of those print mechanisms, including your desktop printer that's in your office or your dorm room or wherever it is that you are, has a specific driver and little piece of software that is engineered and built to properly turn RGB files into a 4-color print through those little tiny cartridges that are in your printer. So we are best off telling the digital interface that we're working with that we want to stay in the world of RGB only if your intention is staying within a digital press environment. So that's all we really need to work on at this point. When I hit OK, there's my new artboard. It has the proper dimension. You can see that it's, you know, the white area, and the dark gray area around it is my, you know, the ether. And there's this nice red line that exists around the outside, and that is my bleed, which means my graphics, my backgrounds, my photos, whatever that I need to go full edge to edge must go all the way to that red line. And that's that part that ensures that the knife, the cutter, the whatever, the guillotine will actually trim without us ever seeing any paper. And this is important, very important. So that's 1/8 of an inch on each side, which means it's a 1/2 inch in total wider and taller than my document. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up guides for us to handle the other rules of designing for print. And the first one is really about our safety boundary, which is an area that you shouldn't let anything super important exceed or cross the line of. And that will also be based on 1/8 of an inch, but interior, on the inside of our document. Sometimes people call it the gutter, sometimes people just call it the safety margins, or the live area. So we're going to create a box based off the rectangle tool that will have no fill. And I'm just going to stick with red on the stroke, because red is a nice warning color. And I am going to just click. And when I click, instead of actually drawing a rectangle, it says, okay, you want a rectangle, what size do you want it to be? So I know that I have a document that is 3.667 inches wide. And if you're not good with math, what's awesome is that you can do the math right in this box. So I'm going to say 3.667 minus 0.25, which is 1/8 of an inch on each side added up, meaning 1/4 of an inch. So if I hit tab, it just does the math for me and says, okay, the width will be 3.417 inches. If you didn't know that you can do math in those boxes, that's just a huge saving grace right there. And that is pretty much application wide, meaning you can do that in After Effects, you can do that in Photoshop, you can do that in a lot of other programs that have number fields like this, because thank God those engineers involved with the development of these things knew that they were good with math, but that probably most of the users weren't going to be. So why don't we include a little behind the scenes calculator, and that is wonderful. You should be able to do the math for the height, because all we're doing is taking 1/4 inch off of 8.5, so that means that the height will be 8.25, right? Now, there's our box, and it's drawn wherever it was that you clicked. So now we just need to make sure that it's centered vertically and horizontally to the canvas. If we come up to our alignment controls, here it is to the artboard, it's checked. I choose center and center. So this new box is now perfectly centered where we need it to be. And if we click off of it with our selection tool, there's the red line. And typically, when we're dealing with guides like this, you'll see that a lot of them are dotted lines, dashed lines, whatever. Some of them are solid lines, so it's kind of up to you. I'm just going to go through the process of saying that I'd like to see this be a dashed line. It's good for us to do, it's good practice, and it also helps this particular box stand out from the other ones. So I'm gonna select it and go to my stroke pop-down menu and set it to be a dashed line, and I'll just leave it 5 and 5. That looks good. The result is a nice dotted line on the inside. This dotted line is that one for us to say, hey, text probably shouldn't go any further than that. Important graphics shouldn't go any further than that, because if that same knife or blade or guillotine, whenever, actually favors the inside, it won't cut off someone's name or important sentences, phone numbers, etc. So it's one more little element that is helpful for us to sort of use as a guideline as we build a project for print. So the next thing is the door knob hole. And the doorknob hole we're going to create in a very similar way using the ellipse tool, and we'll just click somewhere. And the doorknob hole, generally by most door hanger specifications, is 1.25 inches tall and 1.25 inches wide. You hit OK, and it plants it wherever it was that you clicked again, and so you'll want to center it along the horizontal, but we have to find out exactly where this thing needs to live per those doorknob hanger guidelines. And right off the bat, I don't remember, so I'm going to flip over to this guy and take a quick look at this one, and it's off the top edge of it. It should be 0.75 inches from the top. So I'll come back over here. I'm going to select it. I'm going to have the very top reference point selected. And I'll select my Y value, and that'll be 0.75. And it pulls it right up to where it needs to be. How cool is that? So we're actually using some of the coordinate-based fields to say, I want you here, I need you to be there, etc. Not, something beyond just eyeballing it, because it is important when you're dealing with something that will be printed and die cut to be as close to exact as you possibly can. So here we're following those guidelines. There's one more part of this setup that we need to look at, and that is the little cut that will be the slice in the paper where you can actually like slide it onto a doorknob. In this case, you can't just like push it over it because it would just rip the paper. So there's usually a little cut. The cut can be almost anywhere that you want it to be if you have that the freedom to do such. If you're like designing your own thing and the printer will cut wherever you want. Sometimes if you're doing a project like this, you know, from a certain printer or a certain company that offers these sort of products, they might say that your cut line needs to be here at this angle and so on. But we're just going to grab the line tool and we're just going to draw a line. In this case, I'm just going to put it a little bit below the center, and I'm just going to go all the way out to the cut line at a slight degree angle of, you know, maybe 5%, something like that. So that ends up being my cut line. There you go. It could be up here, it could be over there, whatever. I'm starting with it like this, just as long as you establish something. And keep in mind, this is a practical piece of whatever advertising that needs to hang on a door. So you wouldn't put it at the top and go vertical because it would most likely just fall off the doorknob. So there needs to be some untouched area at the top so that to guarantee that it'll actually like hold itself on the doorknob stem or whatever that post is called. So there we have it. That's the initial setup for the guides that I need to be thinking of as a designer for this print project. Now, what's important for me at this point is to say these are elements on a layer that I don't ever want to touch again, and I don't want to have them be a part of my print. So the great thing that Illustrator has set up in its layers window is you can double click on the layer, you know, and it opens up the layer options window, and we can name it. I'm going to name it guides. Okay, you can specify a color. Maybe I'll leave it red since I have red. And then you specify here that it's a template, and what that does is it says that it will not print it, and anything on that layer, it'll dim the images to 50%, and it's also going to lock it. So when I hit OK, that whole layer is now called guides. It has a different icon here, meaning that it's a template, okay, and then it's locked. So this is great. If I set up a new layer now, this is where all my artwork will go. And generally, you pull it down below the guides layer so that those guides are always on top. So no matter what kind of graphics you have, you know, a full background color, a gradient, whatever, or a photo, that you will never obscure those guides. You want them to be on top so that you can continually reference them for areas of layout and safety, and etc. So I now have one artboard set up for this project. I need a second one for the back, right? So I'm going to say that I need to unlock my guides for this one little moment because I'm going to use the artboard tool to copy and reproduce a new artboard, and I'm going to let the functions that the artboard tool has in the control bar copy over anything that is on this document so that I can reuse it, right? So I'm going to go to my artboard tool, and I'm going to, I love a shortcut. You might know this by now. I love a shortcut. The shortcut would be holding down Option, which means you're going to copy something, and I could click and drag a new copied duplicate over. I could also use this button on the top control bar which says New Artboard. and it'll do the same thing. What I like about the dragging version is that I can drag, and while I drag I can hold down shift and it keeps it constrained to that horizontal path. So for now I'm going to keep them close together just because I want to show you something. So there I now have two artboards, and notice that it copied that artwork over, and it only did it because I had this button depressed, which is the move or copy artwork that exists with the artboard. If this button is not depressed and I make a copy of an artboard, all I get is the artboard. I don't get any of the stuff that was inside that artboard. So that's an important thing to not overlook because it helps you. That totally helped me out. I don't have to recreate anything. I don't have to try to reposition anything that I would copy and paste. It just says, hey, whatever's there, just copy it and move it over. And I go, cool, works for me. Now, notice that these artboards overlap and they bleed a little bit. They're too close. This would present problems in the printing process. This is not good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the artboards palette, and it's right next to my layers palette. If you don't see it, you can find it under Window Artboards, right? And it pulls up this palette and it says you have artboard 1, you have artboard 1 copy. Well, we can just name that one artboard 2 if you wanted to, or you can say that it's the back and this one is the front. That's helpful, right? That's organization. We love organization. So what we also have here in this artboard palette is the ability to do some settings. And I'm going to use the little pop-up menu on the top right here. And I'm going to say, okay, I don't want a new artboard. I'm not going to duplicate, not going to delete, or delete empty contents. I'm not going to get into artboard options. What I want is I want to rearrange my artboards. And I'm really getting at just the spacing between them. So if I choose rearrange artboards, it says artboards. We have 2 of them. How many columns do you want? Well, I'd like 2 columns because I'd like to see these things side by side, so I won't touch that. And then it has the spacing. What would you like the spacing to be between these artboards? Well, why don't we just open that up a little bit? I'll go to like 0.5 inches. And I'll hit OK. And when I do that, it spaces them out so that they're not overlapping in the bleed. There's no other artwork. I mean, at this point, I don't have artwork, but there's nothing interfering with the 2 of them. Okay, that's cool, and that's really great. In my templates area, those guides, I have one issue with the back, and that is that this cut line is on the same side of the paper as my front artboard, but I need it to be over here. So this is a good time to say, hey, I'm just going to take all of those guides, mirror you, hold down shift and clicking on these things. So I have my safety margins area, the die cut hole area for the doorknob, and then the slice all selected. Okay, I am going to group them, which is Command G, or under Object Group. And then I am going to reflect them, and I'm going to use the Reflect tool. The Reflect tool is hidden under the Rotate tool. So Reflect tool, double click on it, check out Preview. Ooh, I don't like this. This is looking like trouble. This is looking like trouble, isn't it? Oh, I oversaw something. I missed the fact that this extrudes beyond the edge, so it's not going to do a proper reflect. How should I do it? I know how I'll do it. Cancel. Screw that. I'm going to undo. I'm not going to group them. Isn't it great to watch me work? I'm just going to have this one line selected, and I'll just reflect that. I'll just reflect that line, and then I'm going to move it. Hey, you. I'm currently not using my graphics tablet because I don't have it on hand, which means I'm using my trackpad, and even that is dangerous when you're doing this kind of stuff. So I'll move it over so that it's in the exact same spot as the other one. Perfect. That looks ideal. If I wanted to check, I could look up here and say, yeah, it touches right in the center of that one. And over here, it could probably come a little bit in, just a touch. So, you know what the thing is they only need one cut line when they do this, and they'll use the first artboard, not the back one. But the back one's so darn close enough. If it's off by like the most hair of a point. But for me, it's important as a guide for my setup and design. So there we go. All of that information is on the guides layer, and I'm going to lock it so I can't screw with it now. And now I'm ready to build my my door hanger and bring in all the graphics and etc. So we'll wrap this one up here, and then I'll jump back into the rest of it in the next video.